And now with that, we'll turn it over to a commissioner from Minnesota Management Budget to present the governor's 2024 bonding recommendations. Commissioner, please identify yourself and proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair Lee, Vice Chair Ryer, Lead Erdahl, and members of the committee. My name is Erin Campbell, and I'm the Commissioner at Minnesota Management and Budget. And I'm here today with a few of my colleagues to present the Governor and Lieutenant Governor's infrastructure plan. Today, I will provide an overview of the capital budget process, discuss the growing needs for Minnesota's infrastructure, provide an overview of the Governor's infrastructure plan, and walk through the capital budget financing of this plan. So first, we'll talk about the capital budget process. MMB collects information for the capital budget following a statutorily directed process, which is open to state agencies and political subdivisions whose capital projects are generally eligible for general obligation bonds. Requests are developed in odd number calendar years and published in the governor's recommendations in January of even numbered calendar years. This process is facilitated by MMB. After the capital budget system opened in May, MMB hosted a Q&A session and provided instructions and assistance to agencies and political subdivisions submitting projects. Initial information for projects was published by July. Then, this fall and winter, MMB went on bonding tours, conducted meetings, and reviewed projects. On January 16th, the governor's recommendations and all final requests were published. A few highlights from our site visits were visiting a wastewater treatment plant and hearing about the importance of PFA programs for local governments and seeing state asset preservation needs. As you know, there's a growing demand for capital projects this cycle. A total of $7.6 billion in requests have been received from state agencies and political subdivisions for the 2024 capital budget. $4.7 billion is requested from state agencies, and that's a 16% increase from last cycle. And $2.9 billion is requested from local governments, which is more than double the amount requested last cycle. State agencies who own buildings and other infrastructure requested asset preservation and renovation funding. These projects began to address the deferred maintenance backlog in state infrastructure, which for buildings alone has grown 74% since 2015. The current backlog is $6.4 billion, combining state agencies and higher education. You can see on this slide the breakdown between those different organizations. The $6.4 billion in deferred maintenance on the previous slide does not include other state-owned infrastructure, such as roads and bridges, water infrastructure, and other physical assets, many of which are maintained by the DNR, DOC, and DHS. For example, on the left, DNR replaced a bridge, and on the right, DNR replaced an aging culvert with asset preservation dollars. When rebuilding, DNR considered stream flow, ecosystem design, and the effects of more intense rain events so that we can use these resources for years to come. It's urgent that we invest in asset preservation this session for a variety of reasons. First, it's cheaper to maintain infrastructure than to fix it when it fails. It costs $14 per square foot to repair buildings in excellent condition versus $159 per square foot in crisis condition. 56% of state building systems are in fair, poor, or crisis condition. Additionally, state of Minnesota buildings have an average age of 42 years. The largest and most expensive of all asset renewal projects tend to occur when a building is over 30 years old. As a result, significant funds are needed to be reinvested in these buildings to preserve what we have. The majority of state-owned buildings are more than 30 years old, so it's critical that we reinvest in them now so they can serve Minnesotans for many years to come. Of note, there are state assets in all 87 counties, so investing in asset preservation touches all corners of our state. Next, I'll be walking through the governor's infrastructure plan on a high level. In upcoming hearings, we expect other state agency leaders will be presenting their projects in greater detail. The headline here is that the governor's infrastructure plan takes care of what the state has already built, which is a fiscally responsible bill. This plan is designed to focus on the most critical needs while keeping in mind the historic bonding bill last session, the largest in state history. A major focus in the governor's plan is investing in asset preservation. Last session, the state didn't receive as high a share of the bill as had been done in the past. Asset preservation was 10% of the 2023 enacted package and was 43% of the governor's plan. Importantly, as I said, we view these recommendations as fiscally responsible. This plan stays within the state's debt capacity guidelines, which are $830 million in general obligation bonds. I'd note that rating agencies view the state's adherence to debt guidelines as a positive factor in the state's overall credit rating, so we pay close attention to that too. The plan is also within the $82 million balance in our forecast after inflation at the end of FY27 and spends only $28 million in general fund cash above the forecast. This plan is also within the $84 million balance in the trunk highway fund. This pie chart shows the main categories of the governor's recommendations. The next slide will provide more details. 45%, almost half, is focused on asset preservation and renovating existing state spaces. 22% of the bill is for water and transportation infrastructure. 14% relates to public safety. 10% is for housing and environment, and 9% is for other priorities, including a variety of grant programs. I'll note that overall, 25% of the governor's recommendations are for grants to non-state entities like local governments. $441 million of the plan is to preserve state infrastructure. $103 million is for the University of Minnesota HEPR. $103 million is for Minnesota State, $82 million for HEPR, and $21 million for the St. Paul College project. And $202 million is for state agency asset preservation, including $76 million for the Department of Corrections, which has extensive deferred maintenance need. $22 million is included for other state agency renovation projects, including $13 million for the Department of Human Services to replace water and sewer infrastructure at the St. Peter campus that has exceeded its useful life and would impact clients and staff if it fails. $216 million of the plan is for water and transportation infrastructure. $40 million is included for MnDOT to address state bridges deteriorating into poor conditions across the state. $37 million is included for the Met Council to keep the H-Line bus rapid transit project advancing between downtown Minneapolis and the east side of St. Paul. $109 million is included for the Public Facilities Authority, water infrastructure loans and grants, including $10 million for lead service lines and $18 million for new grants to address contaminants in drinking water for local governments. And $10 million is included for a new pollution control agency grants to address contaminants in drinking water for privately owned wells. We've invested $143 million of the plan in public safety. $75 million is included for the Department of Public Safety investments, including $48 million for a new Bureau of Criminal Apprehension facility in southern Minnesota, providing investigatory and laboratory analysis for criminal investigations in an area of the state with high need. Also included are $4 million for design and land acquisition for an expansion of the BCA's regional office and laboratory in Bemidji, and $22 million for design and land acquisition for new State Patrol headquarters building. In addition, $47 million is included for the Department of Corrections to expand education and programming space at their Rush City facility. It's a facility that lacks sufficient space for programming to transform the lives for a safer Minnesota. $98 million of the plan is for housing and environment. $50 million is included for housing infrastructure bonds to develop housing across the state, including permanent supportive housing, preservation of federally assisted housing, and deeply affordable new construction. $7.5 million is included to preserve existing public housing and keep it safe and healthy for residents. $16 million is included to update the Minneapolis Veterans Home, Building 16, to better serve its residents in bringing the facility up to code and addressing systems that have periodic failures. $10 million is included for the Water and Soil Resources Board to acquire permanent easements in ecologically sensitive areas, improving water quality by reducing nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment from entering streams and rivers. And $7 million is included for the Department of Natural Resources to acquire high-priority parcels and improve existing state lands through actions such as replanting and seeding trees after timber harvest. And $85 million of the plan is set aside for other investments in other areas. $40 million is set aside for local projects, and $20 million is included for MnDOT to maintain, expand, construct MnDOT-owned buildings, such as adding mechanical space at the St. Cloud headquarters, which was built in 1969 and needs more space for snow removal and other equipment. $12 million is included for DNR to modernize existing and invest in new facilities, such as expanding the Hibbing Drill Core Library to meet their statutory requirement to store mineral exploration samples. And $5 million is included for the Department of Human Services for grants to political subdivisions, nonprofits, and tribal governments to construct and renovate early childhood facilities. Overall, the governor's plan is estimated to leverage $640 million in other additional funds, such as federal and local funds. Examples include the $39 million in PFA state match is estimated to unlock $196 million in federal funds. $40 million in a MnDOT high priority bridge program is estimated to unlock $168 million in federal funds. The $37 million for the Met Council Bus Rapid Transit is estimated to unlock $75 million in federal funds. And the $50 million in housing infrastructure bonds is estimated to unlock another $50 million in local and federal and private investment. Next week, MMB's Enterprise Director for Federal Funds Implementation will be presenting to this committee about federal infrastructure funding opportunities as well. Finally, I'd like to address the financing plan for the capital budget. $830 million of this package is general obligation bonds, and $152 million is made up of other funds such as appropriation bonds, trunk highway cash, and general fund cash for a total of $982 million across all funds. This table shows the biennial financial impact of the governor's recommendations compared to the forecast. The debt service cost for bonds extends beyond the next biennium, but this table shows the biennial impact of the governor's recommendation to the general fund and to the trunk highway fund. In the general fund, $830 million of GO bonds is assumed in the forecast based on a 10-year historic average. There are some savings in the governor's recommendations compared to forecast because $11 million of the GO bonds are user financed at Minnesota State. Additionally, the housing infrastructure appropriation bonds will have a general fund impact beginning in fiscal year 27. As I mentioned, $28 million is included from general fund cash. Overall, the general fund impact is $28 million in this biennium, and there's $371,000 in savings next biennium compared to forecast. This is within the $82 million balance forecasted at the end of FY27. The trunk highway fund impact is $74 million for this biennium and $0 for the next biennium. This is within the $84 million balance in the trunk highway fund. And finally, just want to make note that the materials for the governor's recommendations are posted on MMB's website. You can see that here, including a summary listing of state and local projects included in the governor's infrastructure plan.
Thank you, Commissioner Campbell. And members, before we move on to questions for the commissioner, I do want to note that if you have specific questions regarding a specific line item or agencies, we will be having the agencies come in future hearings, and so they could speak a little bit more to that. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Chair Lee, and good to be here again in this role with all of you. I think before I get into some comments, just a brief history lesson for those that maybe haven't been around here as many bonding cycles as I've been. And that is that the last 2, 3 bills were exceptional in terms of how we operate. I mean, the money, the cash, that's not the way it's normally been. I think historically, and this is now my, well, no, not that long. This will be my 22nd year here, and I've been on this committee for 20 of them. And, you know, 600 million might have been a good bonding bill for most of that time. When I chaired the committee, we did one over 800 million, and that was a big bonding bill. And just so folks understand that then, if you wanted cash, it was you went to the in my case, you go to Senator Rosen and you beg for a little cash from the Senate so that we can put something together. And 25, 30 million might have been a big amount of cash in those days. But, you know, things changed recently, and we had a lot of cash and a lot of GO, and it got spent. And now we're kind of getting back to the way things used to be, the way normal is. This is an $830 million GO bill, and that's in the old days a big bill. Now it's maybe in the average category, but it's still getting back more to the way things used to be. Saying that, looking at and Commissioner Campbell, hearing your presentation, I think that the governor has provided us with a good proposal to start from. I do like the fact that it's heavy on asset preservation, water, transportation. Those are, I think, the important things that we should be concentrating on. We're going to need to prioritize. We're going to need to scale back some of these things because I think that at 40 million, it's going to be tough to put together a local projects bill. And so, with that, look forward to working with with you and with the governor's office, and of course with the majority here in putting together a bill that reflects a lot of these proposals with some alterations.
Thank you, Representative Erdahl. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Campbell. Thank you for the presentation. Looking ahead requires looking back a little bit, and so as Representative Erdahl mentioned, we had very big bills, and we also, through many committees, had some significant investments in infrastructure through the committees. And I think it'd be helpful when we get into the specifics just to see how the administration has digested some of the significant infrastructure projects if you're asking for more in those same areas. And I see some things where there's duplication where we invested last year and you're asking for more. And I think the question for us is how much have you spent or how much has been invested for those infrastructure projects that we funded last year. And then related to that, and you referenced that next week we'll hear from kind of the federal investment, we're aware of significant dollars that will be available not only to leverage but direct cash. And how many of these proposals that are for asset preservation or facilities, infrastructure, wastewater could be funded directly from federal money that's coming into the state? What is the actual cash opportunity from the federal dollars, and who makes those decisions? Is that solely administration, or is that something where the legislature can provide some, just call them ideas, in terms of that money?
Sounds like that's more of a comment. Chair Hansen. Good question. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Hansen, we hear you on that question and happy to provide some of that information. And I'll go ahead and give Micah Innermill, who is the Federal Funds Director, who will be here with you next week, the question that you've posed so that we can answer that proactively for you.
Representative Pawlowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to just make a few comments on the University of Minnesota and Minnesota State. Mr. Chair, I've requested that both of those entities, when they do their presentations to the Higher Ed Committee, that particularly with asset preservation, it be broken down by university and college, and it be broken down by priority, so that when we take a look at what 102 million would do, I want to see it at the campus level, starting with the priority of those projects. And I also want to take a look at how that would tie into program. As you know, we have had record declining enrollment, and we're fighting our way out of it. I want to make sure if we're making these investments that we're making it in a way that we can address the declining enrollment. I'm amazed at what the governor's done in the parity. Coming within $1 is very impressive. I also think it's a good start. But if you take a look at Min State, the request was 200 million. They have 81.7, and then they jumped down to St. Paul College. Mr. Chair, I think we need an explanation all the way through these presentations of why those changes were made. But I'm going to go back and repeat that, particularly with asset preservation, the presentation will be in my committee, and that data will be for you, Mr. Chair, to make the presentation at the university and college level. And then I want to also see all of the priorities for asset preservation by college and university, Mr. Chair, because it's critical now that we preserve what we have in order to sustain and hopefully improve declining enrollment.
Thank you, Representative Pawlowski, and I think the same request will be for the two systems too when they do come before our committee. Hopefully that's after the conversation that you have in your committee. Next, we have Representative Wolgamott.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Madam Commissioner, for all the work that you and the governor and the lieutenant governor did during the legislative interim of getting out throughout the state, of coming and looking at projects in our districts. One of my favorite memories from the interim was when you came to the Herbrooks National Hockey Center and took a look at that refrigeration system project. And to that point, I want to express my support and gratitude for your commitment to funding HEAPR. As Chair Pawlowski said, the $103 million for the University of Minnesota, the $103 million for Minnesota State, those are huge investments that are absolutely needed in our higher education institutions throughout the state. One thing, Mr. Chair, that I would appreciate asking the commissioner is just some clarification and further explanation. Madam Commissioner, in your presentation, you noted that there were $2.9 billion in requests for local projects. And I see on the spreadsheet here on page 19, line 681, that of those $2.9 billion in requests, that there are $40 million for local projects. Can you explain how you got to that $40 million number, considering there were $2.9 billion in requests, Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Campbell.
Mr. Chair, Representative Wolgamott, I'm happy to answer that question. As you can see, we have decided in this bill to focus very heavily on asset preservation. And the reason that we did that is because we know that we have a responsibility to maintain our state assets and to protect the investments that taxpayers have made in facilities across the state. We also know that state agencies and the governor are some of the strongest advocates for that, and so coming in with a high number is a reflection of understanding that throughout this process, that number is going to go down a little bit. And so what I would say is that having that as a starting point for half of the bill, and then understanding some of the other very significant priorities in places like water infrastructure, public safety and transportation, we wanted to make sure that there was a recognition of local projects ultimately being an important part of the bill, but we're trying to do that within a more constrained resource environment. The thing that I might point to is that 25% of the bill goes to agencies, but to grant programs that ultimately pass through to local governments and other entities. And so while they are not delineated by certain communities, that there are funds in this bill that will go to local government projects through the Public Facilities Authority program, through deed programs, and many others.
Mr.
Representative
Chair,
Wolgamott.
follow up if you please. Well, thank you for that answer, Madam Commissioner. I'm glad to hear that this is a starting point because as members of this committee, as representatives of our district, our communities are counting on us to be strong advocates in delivering for local projects. I know in my district alone, I put forward a $100 million request for downtown St. Cloud revitalization, phase one of which is $20 million. I'm also working with the University of Minnesota and CentraCare for a medical school that's $13 million. That $40 million could get used up in my district alone pretty quick. So again, I appreciate the needs throughout the state and with the agencies. I do hope that we can work as a committee and with you and the governor and lieutenant governor to find that balance where we are meeting the needs of asset preservation throughout the state while also meeting the needs that we have as representatives of communities for those local projects. So thank you very much, Madam Commissioner, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Wolgamott. Representative Scraba.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to be back. Spent a lot of time with everyone this summer. It was fun last summer. Got to learn the state, right? Being new to this process, and Commissioner, maybe more of a statement and a recognition. One of the things that caught my eye were, cheaper to maintain than fix, state agency deferred, HEPA, all these things about putting money. Is it safe to say, and this is kind of what I'm looking at, that these backlogs and that are caused by both political parties, that there's not one particular than the other, that it is what it is, and how we tackle it forward? I know at the University of Minnesota, they had 500 million. I think that was the ask that night, and I see they have 100 million, but that's for the whole system. So does the U get more down here? Does Crookston get more, And to me, I'm just curious, because I'd like to fund it all, but there were some things that the governor did and did not do. What is your take on that? Do you think a lot of these deferred things are political, or is it just the nature?
Representative Scraba, before I
Sorry.
turn it over to the
Sorry, Mr.
Commissioner, no worries. The two systems will be coming before us on Monday, and
Right.
so you could ask them specifically around their distribution formula.
Yep.
Commissioner Campbell.
Chair Lee, Representative, I think that, as has been noted, the bonding bills are balancing acts, and regardless of who's putting those bills together, you're trying to figure out how to make it work, how to get a bill across the finish line. And oftentimes, my observation is that asset preservation takes a bit of a hit in that process. And so hopefully that's a simple enough answer to your question. But I think that if you look back at how much governors have recommended in asset preservation and how much is ultimately funded, almost always it is at a lower level in recognition of the other things that need to get added to the bill.
Representative Scraba.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. That's it. Thanks.
Members, any additional questions before we turn it over to the Assistant Commissioner for the next segment? Seeing none, thank you so very much, Commissioner Campbell.
Thank you very much.